Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to our event. My name is Mary Hirschfeld. I'm the John T. Ryan Associate Professor of Theology and Business Ethics and the Faculty Director of the Business Ethics and Society Program. The Business Ethics and Society Program is a new mission within Mendoza to bring Catholic social thought into conversation with business practices. And our aim is to try to create a space where we can think about business in service of the good life and the common good and how it relates to all the various features that make up for a good life. So we have many things under our umbrella at the Business Ethics and Society Program, but one of them is this lecture series, the Cahill Lecture Series, which is named after Frank Cahill. Frank Cahill was a businessman who had a real mission and a desire to share the wisdom he had accumulated, the knowledge he had accumulated in his business life with others. He himself was the executive vice president of Roadway Express Incorporated for 31 years, retiring in 1996. But that wasn't enough for him. After that, he went and lectured at Xavier University on business ethics until he passed away a few years later. In his memory, his families and friends decided to inaugurate this lecture series to celebrate and honor Frank, and especially his passion for finding moral purpose in business. So welcome to this year's edition of the Cahill Lectures. It's my special privilege to introduce my friend and colleague, Andy Yuengert. So I'm going to read the formal thing first, and then I'm going to say a few words, but hopefully not to embarrass him. Andy Yuengert is a Blanche Seaver Professor of Social Science at Pepperdine University. He holds a PhD in economics from Yale University, and his BA in economics was from the University of Virginia. Prior to joining the faculty at Pepperdine, he was a research economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He is the author of 4 books. The first is The Boundaries of Technique. The second, Inhabiting the Land, A Case for the Right to Migrate. The third, Approximating Prudence, Aristotelian Practical Wisdom and Economic Models of Choice. And his most recent book, Catholic Social Teaching and Practice, Exploring Practical Wisdom and the Virtues Tradition. So now a personal word or two about Andy Yuengert. He is the model of what we're trying to achieve at the Business Ethics and Society Program. Andy started off his career as just a pure economist, trained at Yale, which is one of the top places to get a PhD. But he also is a man of very deep faith, and he wanted to bring these two things together. So if you look at the trajectory of his books, what he did is something that's completely extraordinary in the academy. He taught himself Aristotle, and he taught himself Aquinas, and he read deeply and widely so that he could write these very insightful books about how to bring the wisdom tradition into conversation with the technical apparatus of economic analysis. That way of describing his work does not give sufficient praise to the depth and wisdom that he has. So in a world where we're all fragmented and specialized, he's the model of someone who leads a truly integrated life, bringing his faith into conversation with his career. He's an extraordinary family man and a really good colleague and friend, a very decent human being. So without further ado, it's my great privilege to introduce to you Andy Yuengert.
Well, it can only be downhill from there. Thank you, Mary. I didn't teach myself a lot of this stuff. I had great colleagues who were very patient with me, among whom was Mary, who put me in. At one point I remember saying, Aquinas is your friend. You need to pay more attention to Aquinas. So let me say a little bit about how I got to to this talk here, and a little bit about my intellectual journey. So I was trained, in the 80s, I was an undergraduate. I took economics. I was just entranced by economics. I tell my students that they're in the hands of a fanatic. Economics changed my life. I actually left one school, went to another school so I could study economics more. So yeah, economics, I saw economics everywhere. It seemed to explain everything. Anybody who's just fallen in love with economics probably has the same experience. At the same time, I was a Catholic, and in the 80s, the US bishops were writing about the economy. And so what I was seeing through the lens of economics seemed to clash, at least to some degree, with what I was seeing through the lens of the bishops of the US and how they saw the economy. Now, as a Catholic, I sort of assumed that there didn't have to be a clash, that all truth is one, and so that you could find some way to put these two seemingly divergent ways of looking at the world into conversation. They may both be changed by it, but there's some way to actually resolve them somehow. So that really sort of gave rise to my desire to do more. So I went and got a PhD. The advice I was given was, go get a PhD in economics. Nobody will listen to you in economics if you just get some combined degree. So I went and became an economist. Was at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in the early 90s, and I decided, well, maybe it's time for me to start trying to grapple a little bit more with the Catholic social tradition. And so I had a modern education, which means I hadn't read any of the philosophical and theological background that you would need to try to make sense of the way Catholics were talking about the world. So I went and I found this. I couldn't look it up online at this time. It was the early 90s. I went and I found the reading list for St. John's College. I figured, well, at least if I just start working my way through that, I'll have some idea about what Catholics mean or what the popes mean when they talk about the society in a certain way. I didn't read everything on the list, but eventually I got through to Aristotle's Ethics. And that was really where I started to see the world a little bit differently. So Aristotle's Ethics, if you haven't read it, is about human flourishing, about happiness and what that is, and the role of the virtues in pursuing becoming virtuous, that role of that in becoming a happy, a flourishing person, and where virtue comes from, all as preparatory for the politics to think about how should we live together. So I started out as kind of interested in this because Aristotle was interested in goods, in that people were trying to achieve. And as an economist, I thought that, hey, economists are all about people pursuing things that they think are good. But Aristotle has one phrase early on that was kind of jarring, but also a real challenge to me. He starts out by saying, our discussion of happiness and the virtues and what I was interested in, practical wisdom, will be adequate if it has as much clearness as the subject matter admits of. For precision is not to be sought for alike in all discussions, any more than in all products of the crafts. So I took this as a challenge. Right? Here was Aristotle saying, in some matters of human flourishing and behavior, you can only be so precise. In fact, later on he says it's the mark of an educated person not to seek more precision than the subject matter admits of. So as a newly minted economist, I took this as a challenge. My response was, oh yeah? Do you just give a couple economists a couple months to think over this, and we'll come up with a pretty precise model of human behavior that'll probably cover everything that you're interested in. Right? So this really started me, was a starting point where I basically, this kind of brash confidence that you could take an economic model of behavior and really capture all the relevant stuff that was in the Aristotelian tradition about decision making and the virtues. And so this resulted after several years in a book called Approximating Prudence, which was basically taking the rational choice model and seeing how close the rational choice model could get to practical wisdom, which is the virtue by which you govern yourself and guide your life, make decisions in Aristotle. Of course, I found that there were some things that the rational choice model could capture, and there were quite a few things that the rational choice model couldn't capture. So as a result of this, I became very much aware of what economics could not do, what could not cover, right? Could not, what would be invisible to economics in its analysis of the social order. And I became very much more aware of virtue. Right? So whereas before, I still see a lot of things in economic terms, but whereas before I saw economics everywhere, now I see virtue everywhere. So that informs what I'm going to show you today. So after I got through talking about economics in light of Aristotle, since I'm a Roman Catholic and Catholic social teaching brings into play a lot of economic analysis, I turned this lens of virtue on Catholic social teaching. And one of the things I found out early on when I was trying to formulate a proposal for a book is that when you look up the basic texts, not the basic text, but the basic secondary literature on Catholic social teaching. And if you look to the indexes of those books, you don't find the word virtue in the index. You don't find the word practical wisdom in the index. So there was something about Catholic social teaching that was very, very focused on the principles, but the virtues by which those principles are put into action were sort of off stage in Catholic social teaching. So that basically motivates my work here. I want to look at the principles of Catholic social thought through the lens of virtue and see how do they look different when you see virtue everywhere and then you turn your glance on Catholic social teaching. In particular, I'm going to focus on chapter 4 in this book, which is looking at the vision of society that you get through a virtues lens and how that might integrate the way the Catholic Church sees society itself and all of the activity within it, particularly how it sees the lay role in society. So the outline, I'm going to talk about the lay mission, according to the Church, macro and micro. And by macro and micro, I don't really mean macroeconomics and microeconomics. It's sort of at a macro level, at sort of the 30,000 feet social analysis, versus what's going on in the lives that people are living as they go through life. Then I want to talk a little bit about personalism through the lens of practical wisdom. And then we'll talk about some of the barriers to seeing the person in modern social science, which is an important tool of analysis in Catholic social teaching. So let's talk about the laity's mission first of all. So this is from Apostolicam Actuositatem, which is a Vatican II document on the apostolate of the laity. It's also one of the coolest titles, I think, that you come across in Catholic thought. But the laity, so the laity are part of the people of God, and we share in the mission of the people of God. So the laity likewise share in the mission of the whole people of God in the church and in the world. They exercise the apostolate, in fact, by their activity directed to the evangelization and the sanctification of men. That's the first part of their mission. They're part of the evangelization and sanctification of the world. And to the penetrating and perfecting of the temporal order through the spirit of the gospel. The term perfecting here could be a little misleading. We're not talking about a utopia. Perfecting means bringing closer to its perfection. In other words, trying to orient it more towards the good and its own purpose. So there's a twofold mission that the laity participate in, right? The evangelization mission and the mission related to that. Evangelization is primary, but related mission of social reform, perfecting the social order in which we find ourselves. So why is it that this is so important for the laity? Well, the laity are in the social order, right? They're embedded, they're everywhere in that order. So in Lumen Gentium, which is the constitution on the church, which has a nice section on the laity, say they, the laity, live in the ordinary circumstances of family and social life from which the very web of their existence is woven. They are called there by God that by exercising their proper function and led by the Spirit of the gospel, they may work for the sanctification of the world from within as a leaven. Right? So think of that idea of leaven. Where is leaven? Leaven is spread throughout the dough, and it works wherever it happens to be, to raise the dough. Leaven is not a lobbying group. There isn't a department of leaven. Leaven is embedded in the dough, and it does its work in the space where it lives within that dough. Okay, so what resources does the church offer the laity for this? One, it offers formation in the spiritual life. So this is the sacraments, the life of prayer in the church and private prayer. And it offers formation in social doctrine, right? The principles of Catholic social teaching, which are supposed to both inform and inspire the laity to pursue the Catholic social vision. So what are the principles of Catholic social teaching? There are many more that I'm putting up here, but I'm going to talk about what are often called the 4 pillars, and then add in the option for the poor. There are other ones like care for the environment that you're probably familiar with. But the 4 pillars encompass a lot of it. So 1 is human dignity. 2 is the common good, which reflects the social nature of the human person. And then related to communities are the related principles of solidarity and subsidiarity. And then there's the option for the poor, which reminds us that the poor and the marginalized deserve special attention and solicitude from us in all of our lives and our policies. So what are these principles for? They're often applied at sort of the level of policy, and that's where they're most often spoken of in Catholic social thought. But the church considers them to be something more comprehensive, right? They aren't just for policy, right? They're principles of a general and fundamental character since they concern the reality of society in its entirety, from close and immediate relationships to those mediated by politics, economics, and the law, right? So it's supposed to be for the laity in all of their work, wherever they happen to be in the social order. So the laity in their work, you can think about where this action of the laity occurs. Some of it occurs at what I would call a macro level. This is at the level of systems, which involves the reform of laws, right? The design of institutions or the reform of institutions, good governance, right? And the institution of that or changes in that. This is the realm of social science. It's the realm of politics and social ethics, right? So because you're seeing society from a very high level, you're seeing it as a society, as a system that can be manipulated or changed or affected by changes at that particular level. So the language at that level of analysis is social science, whether it's economics, sociology, social psychology, and so on. At this level is also where much of social ethics operates. Social ethics is often operating at the level of policy. What's the macro analysis of the economy? What should the economy look like? What should a good institution look like? And social ethics is often using the tools of social science to orient itself to its analysis at this level and then try to apply the principles of Catholic social teaching at this level. But lay people are also active in many other communities and they're doing a lot of other kind of social work in society, right? They're members of families, they're members of local communities, churches, they're networks of friends. In this area, it's not governed by the principles of social science, it's governed by the virtues and practical wisdom. One way of thinking the virtues, we often think that the virtues are having the right values. But virtue in the Aristotelian tradition and in the Thomistic tradition is not just wanting well. It's not just having the right values. It's acting well. Virtue allows you to take principles and make all of the decisions and adjustments that you need to make to actually act in the world to try to realize them to the extent that you can. Not just at the macro level, but also in the family, in the communities, in schools, among your friends. So practical wisdom and the virtues are basically governing behavior at that level. So what's the challenge? The challenge here that I want to emphasize is that at the macro level, our organizing framework is often social science. What's going on at the macro level? Well, we organize it through economics, through sociology, through the technocratic analysis of systems. And one of the things I've learned through the work that I've done up to this point is that those systems of analysis are blind to practical wisdom and the virtues. It doesn't fit neatly into any analytical treatment. And so at the macro level, we have the exercise of Catholic social teaching in a way that is unable to see a lot of the important work that's going on at the micro level, because the micro level is not governed by these social science approaches or the social science view. People are much closer to the action there. And so this is the problem that I want to address here and try to solve. So I've already talked about economics, but the problem of economics is a larger problem with social analysis and analysis in general. So this is a quote from George Bernard Shaw, humorous about economists. It says, if all the economists were laid end to end, they'd never reach a conclusion. And usually we're talking about a practical conclusion, a decision. President Truman famously said, give me a one-armed economist, because an economist would never tell you what to do. He would say on the one hand this, and on the other hand this. And he wouldn't help Truman to actually decide what to do. So he said, give me a one-armed economist, I just want to know what to do. Well, it's similar to this. If you put all the economists together and it doesn't add up to a decision in situations. So this is funny when you talk about it, economists, or economists laugh at it at least. But there's a broader statement behind this. If you replace the word or the phrase the economists with the phrase modern analysis, it would still be true. One of the unacknowledged truths of the modern era is that modern analysis, if you took every modern analysis, whether it's the various social sciences, scientific analyses, you add them all up and they don't add up to a decision. There's a space between analysis and decision. So analysis can be empirical. You're learning about all that, being really careful about data and definitions and how data variables relate to each other and how to tease out causation in that data. There's a lot of theoretical analysis where you make certain assumptions and you trace them through in a logical way in a model. Most modern analysis that's ethical is ethical analysis. You assume certain principles, like the principles of Catholic social teaching. You try to tease out implications of them in some way. All of these analyses, when you put them together, do not actually result in an actual decision. Something has to be added to the analysis to actually result in deciding to do this instead of that. If you doubt me on this, just reflect back on the pandemic. In the pandemic, there was a tremendous amount of analysis in the public square. There was analysis of the health consequences and of various policies, shutdowns, masking, variations on that. There was analysis of the economic effects of the pandemic, some of which were in favor of shutdowns, some of which weren't. There was analysis of civil liberties, right? These are the three big areas where there were trade-offs in pandemic policy between health and civil liberties and economic activity. One of the frustrations one of the things that's highlighted by this time is the ineffectiveness of analysis to actually result in a decision. The analysis of the health consequences was often disputed, for one thing. You have to decide, well, here are our models of what we understand from the past. What does this model not capture? You have to evaluate the model and the reality of it to actually use it to make a decision. The trade-offs between health and economics, no analysis helps you make those trade-offs. The analysis is silent on if you have to trade off one thing against another. So in response to that, how do you reconcile it? Well, when you're faced with this, the inability of your analysis to actually result in a practical decision, what do? Well, sometimes you just choose the analysis that you like and you run with it. Right? So basically, we're just going to try to minimize the number of deaths from COVID. It's not necessarily deaths total, but you choose what's in front of you and you assume that at least I'll have a simple decision here. Is it the best decision? Well, it doesn't take into account the fullness of all the things you might want to take into account. And the other thing that moderns do is we create more analyses. We think if we can just do more analysis, somehow the answer to what to do will become obvious. The other thing you can do is you can pretend that your analysis is dispositive, right? You say, and disagreeing with it means disagreeing with the science. In some way, you're tempted to claim more authority for the analysis in a practical sense than it really has. You're trying to use it to make a decision when it's really incapable of actually cashing out in an actual decision. So I start out with the idea that there's this gulf between analysis in general, which I'm not deriding. Analysis is really important. You'd be foolish not to take it into account. But it doesn't result in action by itself, even if you multiply it. What does result in action? Well, what fills up the space between the general analysis and actually making a decision, between general principles and actually acting on those principles? You have to have two things. You have to have motivation. So someone will have a really important analysis of an important topic, and then they'll have to find a way to convince people to actually act on it. The other thing you need, and actually that's where people stop. They think if only we can get people to care enough, and that's what they think virtue is just caring enough, then we can solve these problems. But the second part, the second thing you need to add in here is an evaluation of the limits of your model and all of the contingencies and the rich context in which you have to act that may not match your model. Right? So you have to figure all that in as well. This is all done by the virtues. This is the function of the virtues, is to actually bring general principles, general ideas of the good into conversation with action to the end of actually acting in a situation. This is actually a more expansive view of virtue than is normal, but it's right out of Aristotle. Right? The virtues are practical. They're not just wanting well or having the right values. They're actually being able to act on those values in a way that brings those goods to being in a very messy, complicated world. That's what the virtues do. Notice that because they're filling this gap that analysis can't fill, the exercise of these virtues is not going to be very susceptible to analysis. In other words, you're not going to be able to come up with some protocol to say, how do I act with practical wisdom? It's addressing a problem that analysis can't address, and so it's not going to be analytical in the way it approaches. It's going to be a skill, an intuition, a habit that people have that we can recognize that some people are better at it than others in acting in these kinds of environments that face us. So practical wisdom is a virtue. In Aristotle, that means it's a reasoned habit of action. Right? It leads to action, acting in the world. It means acting well, not just wanting well. Acting well, what does it mean to act well? Well, as a human animal, right? So we share certain things with other animals. We share passions or emotions, sensitive. We're fearful. We have desires that sometimes may threaten our reason. But we're not just animals. We're human animals. We reason about what's good. So I might be attracted to something, but I say, is that really good for me right now? And we reason in the context of our entire life, because we can see ourselves as human beings working through this life. So is this good? Is this good for who I am right now in this situation, in this sort of life that I'm living? That's what virtue does. In an environment that is not, that is resistant to analysis, right? We call this contingency, in which there's a lot of uncertainty about what you should want. Sometimes you're in a situation that, what should I be looking for here? What should I be trying to accomplish? Sometimes there's uncertainty about what it is you should be pursuing in a certain situation. And then there's uncertainty about whether, if I take this action, what's going to happen as a result of it. Right? And in analysis, we try to describe this with probability theory. But what if you don't have you don't have enough information to create a probability distribution? But you have to act with intelligence anyway. That's what practical wisdom does. And it's also exercised in community. Right? Where do you learn it? You learn it from other people who are also trying to exercise it in a community of practice. And oftentimes the community that you compare it to are other kinds of communities where people have common goals, or they're trying to achieve a certain kind of excellence in, say, rock climbing or musical performance. Right? In those communities, you learn how to do it, not just from a book, but from other people who are trying to live the same kind of life and valuing it. You learn from others in a process that's more like apprenticeship than it is like learning from a book. So social science, so I'm going to do this very quickly because I've taken more time than I want up to this point. So social science, in some ways, the argument I make is that it's blind to the exercise of practical wisdom and the virtues. Social science is abstract. Right? You simplify a problem and generalize it. It's partial. You're leaving certain things out so that you can look for patterns in the things that you leave in. Practical wisdom, actually making a decision, is synthetic. Right? You don't have the chance. You don't have the opportunity to say, well, let me go back and do more research. Let me just choose this model. I know this model's incomplete, but I have to make a decision that's for me in this environment that is actually complete. Social science is conditional. If this is true, if this model's true, if these conditions hold, then you should do this. Well, in practical wisdom, it's unconditional. It isn't a matter of, well, if this is true, I have to act in the environment I find myself in. Right? And I bear the consequences of it. It's very first person. It's not the sort of problem some well-trained person who knows calculus can solve. It's my decision that I'm bearing the consequences of. I'm not making it for someone else. And then, within the social science literature, human beings in general are acted upon. Even in economics, where you have preferences and individuals are out there trying to optimize them, those preferences are fixed, or they behave in ways that are influenced by external forces. And it's the external forces that the social scientists are trying to affect, not the individuals themselves. Now, from the perspective of virtue, humans are causes, right? Human beings are in an open system where human beings are moving themselves around. There are patterns, but there's a freedom there that there isn't in a closed system like social science. So what fills up that gap is practical wisdom and the virtues. Right? So if I want to understand that gap between macro and micro, I need to tell a story that involves the virtues. Right? And so this is just a sketch of my project in this book, which is trying to interrogate the principles of Catholic social teaching, which are also analytical principles with virtues of practical wisdom. So at the macro level, the mode of analysis is often social science, which is blind to practical wisdom, which is operative at the micro level, that the macro level is trying to analyze. From the point of view of the laity, this creates a kind of remoteness to the extent that Catholic social teaching is operating at the macro level. One of the complaints about people in Catholic social teaching is, why haven't the laity bought into this? Well, it's pretty remote if it's operating at the macro level, where real reform is structural. Right? What's really happening is not what you're doing in your daily life, but what's happening at the reform level and structures. It's a political project, and not every Catholic is interested in political projects all the time. And it tends to be for lay elites, the people who are actually in place to operate at that macro level. So not surprisingly, the person in the pew may not understand the relevance of the principles. What does subsidiarity have to do with my daily life? What does solidarity have to do with my daily life? That's something that operates up there somewhere, or we talk about at election time. And so you might doubt whether micro action is even relevant, right, or even part of Catholic social teaching. Well, Catholic social teaching says it is, and it should be. So how do we integrate this macro and micro level? I want to do it through the idea of personalism, but I want to read personalism with an emphasis on practical wisdom, right, as part of Christian personalism. It's already there. One of the challenges of doing work like this is you can say, well, this is you can never say this is not there at all. you have to argue that it's underemphasized. And when something's underemphasized, it's easily ignored by other people. So you can respond to this by saying, well, no, it is talking about practical wisdom in these certain areas. So some of it is a matter of emphasis. Okay, so what is personalism and how is it related to human dignity? Right? There are two aspects to personalism. The first, which is richly described in Gaudium et Spes, which is a Vatican II document, really has to do with divine election. Right? You are infinitely valuable to God. Right? He loves you. He created you to be in communion with him, right, and with others. So the first part of the human dignity is this divine election, right, that we are each valued. Human beings are the only creatures that God created for the sake of themselves, for their own sake. And so we have this vocation to communion, which makes each of us individually extremely important. Society should be for people who are infinitely valuable in God's eyes, and for the community among them that is part of their dignity. The other part of it, which is in Gaudium et Spes, but it's not emphasizing Gaudium et Spes, it's more John Paul II in Laborem Exercens, when he's talking about human work, he starts with the divine election in Gaudium et Spes, and then he uses that to expand on an aspect of that, which is human work. We're made in the image of God, so we're made for communion with God and with others, just like God is a community. But we're also put to work. God put us in the garden. He put us on this earth to order it, which is a share in his own ordering of the universe. So we've been given a vocation to human action, and of course what governs that human action in the place that each of us, the individual place each of us finds ourselves in, is the exercise of practical wisdom. Right? To realize the human good in line with God's, the love of God, in the place in the creation that we have been, that we find ourselves. So it's possible to look at personalism and to leave out that second part. It's not left out in the teaching, but many treatments of personalism, like the treatment in the compendium, really put the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, by the way, it's a summary, emphasizes divine election when it talks about the dignity of the person, but really doesn't talk much about the vocation to work, right? Or our vocation to communion and to ordering and work in this world. So it's basically the sort of a macro, trying to correct the invisibility of the person from macro, but by emphasizing that divine election, but not emphasizing the agency that's part of each human being's vocation. Right? And so what comes out of this is you can have an emphasis on rights, human rights, because human beings have this tremendous dignity, but you can lose the emphasis on responsibilities, or you can lose the emphasis on, you can emphasize the possession of these rights and lose track of the achievement that rights allow you to have as a human being. So I want to emphasize a practical personalism that has the divine election, but doesn't lose sight of the vocation to work. So I want to tell a story about society that emphasizes that exercise of practical wisdom, that divine vocation to work. So this is from the ground up, and this is basically chapter 4 in my book. So I want to tell the same story about the levels of activity, but I'm going to start with the micro. So we're going to start with family, community, what's occurring in those, what kinds of work and what kinds of virtues are occurring in them. And we're going to work our way up from there to the macro. And so by starting there and trying not to lose sight of practical wisdom on the way up, when we get to the macro level, it'll be hard to ignore what macro is missing. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you would keep it in mind even as you're doing macro analysis. So it all starts with the human person, as we know in personalism. The beginning subject and the goal of all social institutions is and must be the human person. This is from, again, Gaudium et Spes. So the human person is a person of great dignity, created and saved by God for communion, made in the image of God, each of us, and put at work in the world to exercise our reason and our will as part of God's providence in the world. We have a share both in his creation. We aren't creators, but we have a share in that, and a share in redemption, in our work in the world. So we start out with the Imago Dei, a person of great dignity. But what's missing from this person? Right? We can't just stop here. What's missing from this picture is that the person is inherently social. Right? To describe the person, you have to describe as a spiritual being defined through interpersonal relations. We were made for communion with God and communion with other people. Right? So we're naturally social. So this is not enough. This is not the picture of the person. The person's embedded in a whole bunch of social relationships. If you're trying to get to know somebody, what do you ask them? Where are you from? Oh yeah, I knew somebody who worked there. Oh yeah, I know your family. Do you have any brothers and sisters? You ask questions about people's relationships to get to know them, because we're inherently social. So why is it, what do people get from community, right, from society? Jacques Maritain, in Discussing the Person, basically people need society by virtue of their needs and by virtue of their dignity. Right? So from society, we need society because we can't produce everything ourselves. And we need shelter, clothing, protection, formation of our own character from communities. We can't do all this ourselves. So we have needs from our imperfections that cause us to need others. Right? We can call these common goods. These are the things that we get that satisfy our defects as individuals. That's not all we get from community. It's also a function of our dignity. We are made for community, so community gives voice or gives an outlet for our need to pursue, not just get goods that are good for us, but to pursue them together in community. This is the common good. It's indivisible, so if a husband and wife are pursuing a good together through a marriage, that's not their communion with each other is not divisible. There may be goods in that marriage that each of them gets, but the marriage itself is the common good. If they get divorced, they don't each take half the marriage with them. It's something that they are generating together. It's a communion of persons. And this is also an important reason why we need society, perhaps the more important reason. So the family is the primary human community, husband and wife in unity without losing their personality. And the goods of a family, the common goods, are the children, their formation, the physical and emotional and spiritual support that you get within a family. But the family itself, although it's meeting the needs of the individuals there, the family also is oriented towards a larger community. Well, I'm not going to have time to go into it right now, but if you actually, if you ask the question, well, what are the principles for the layperson in the pew? You can talk about all the principles of Catholic social teaching just in the family. Solidarity, subsidiarity, option for the poor. If you're in anybody in a family of a certain size, at least, there's somebody suffering in that family all the time. And everybody sort of helps them out. It's part of being in a family and part of being committed to that family. Right? So all of the principles are there already in these smaller communities, although they're not emphasized. Solidarity and subsidiarity and option for the poor. What organizes all of this in the family? It's the practical wisdom of the husband and the wife, working together, governing that family and its goods. And of course, as the children get older and become more agents themselves, they participate in this exercise at the family level of generating and preserving these goods. Of course, there's this, when you analyze society in this mode, you're never stopping at a particular level. Right? So we started out with the person, and the person's not just an atom, but needs a larger community. Well, the family by itself is not sufficient. Right? The family has needs that it cannot provide by itself, and it has a larger community. The family is also inherently social. There are certain things families cannot produce for themselves. Education sometimes. They're common goods that families turn to others in community to provide together. Sometimes they're remedies for its defects, but usually it's help to fulfill our purpose as a family and not replacement. A family also has a need to participate in a larger community and contribute to that larger community's common good. Not because of what it gets from the larger community, but that's part of its good is to actually participate in this larger community and pursue larger common goods. So you turn to churches, extended family clubs, for-profit businesses, nonprofit businesses. You can think of as communities that families are part of. And so they provide common goods and they provide the opportunity of the common good, right? Participating in some joint project with other people gives rise to communion and fellow feeling and fraternity in these other areas. You can analyze these other lower level communities just above the family in terms of the principles of Catholic social teaching, which I'm not going to have time to go into in detail. So notice that at these other communities, there are also opportunities to exercise practical wisdom in these communities, in their organization and function. The principles don't apply in the same way in every community. A business is not the same thing as a family. Church is not the same thing as a family. So solidarity, subsidiarity, the other principles apply in different ways in different communities. One of the things that happens in communities is you're looking down towards those communities below you that you're supposed to be existing for and helping. But you're also looking up because any community is part of a larger social order that it should be contributing to. So practical wisdom is crucial in every community at every level. Promotes the good of the community and integrates that community with the communities below it that are part of it, and also with the communities that it's part of, that it's turning to as a larger whole. It's practical wisdom at each level that manages and governs the judgments you need to create and maintain these flourishing communities. So it's in these communities, the stakes here is that it's in these communities that you learn virtues, that you learn practical wisdom from other people who are pursuing goods alongside you, that you might be imitating or you're learning from. So it's learned in micro action. If the functions of these lower level communities are lost, there's no reason for them. And the practical wisdom and the virtues get lost as well. And the micro ends up suffering. The micro communities end up suffering as a result of that. So let me say something about subsidiarity as a principle at the macro level. When you see these smaller communities and the social goods that are being produced in them and the virtues that are being formed in individuals in these communities, the idea of subsidiarity, which is often expressed as an efficiency principle, right? I want to let lower levels do things because they have better information or things go better when they're addressed at local levels, is radically incomplete. And when the social doctrine talks about subsidiarity, it doesn't just say it's not a good idea to try to do everything at the level of government. It says it's gravely wrong to take away from lower communities what they can do and absorb it into a larger one. It's an injustice and at the same time a grave evil and a distortion of right order. Right? So you only see this if you see that what's going on at the micro level are the production of important social goods and flourishing. Okay, so just to wrap up, so at the macro level, and since I'm an economist, I see this in my own discipline. You don't want to lose sight of the things you can't see, which is everything that's going on at the local level, the social goods and virtues that are being produced and exercised there. So you might say, well, why do people focus on the macro level almost exclusively in Catholic social teaching? Well, one, the micro levels can recede in importance when you're looking at the macro level. But also, I've heard many people say, well, this is where the big problems are. Right? So I'm trying to save the world. I have to do it at the macro level. Right? So this is where we have to act. And the micro level subsidiary is just a distraction. People won't think about the macro areas if we focus them on the micro levels. Two things aren't going that well at the micro level if you look around in society. So it's not a matter of that can take care of itself. And two, you may be able to do a lot of good at the macro level by changing society and its structures. You can do a lot of damage at the macro level as well. It's not clear what the right thing to do is at that level. And you can see a lot of damage done up there as well. Okay, so actually I think I should just stop here. And if any of this comes up, actually one last point. The way you envision society is going to be the way you envision the lay role in it. If society is mechanistic, if it's basically technocratic, it's a complicated machine that has levers that the technocrats understand and can pull, then practical wisdom, Catholic social teaching is really for the technocrats and the elites. If it's a struggle for power, then the people who understand, the critical theorists are the ones that Catholic social teaching is for, and the people seeking power to make those changes. If society is practically personalist and is sort of suffused with the performance of practical wisdom and the goods that it generates, then practical wisdom of each person and the information of Catholic social teaching is important for everyone, no matter where they are in society. So let's stop there and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
So if anybody has any questions for this lovely talk. So while people are reflecting, I'm going to toss a question to you. Can you say a little bit specifically about the role of business in this web that you talked about, and what does practical wisdom look like in that sphere?
Yeah, this is the crucial question. Is business a community? Does it have a common good? Well, we know that people turn to business, work in business, buy from businesses because it provides things that they can't provide on their own. A living. You can approach this in two ways. You can say, well, what is our conception of the business? If it's purely social science driven, functional, then you have to say, well, what are we missing? Right? What are the exercises of virtue, particularly in practical wisdom? And also, what are the bonds that are created between individuals who work together in workplaces? So there are two modes of analysis there. One is, well, businesses are not as barren of human goods as we think. And two, managing a business should require you to be, if you want to do good in the world, to be aware of the social goods that business can provide, as well as the goods. And so thinking of it as providing, people come together in a business to provide goods together is the first step in that. Right? What are and so the questions you would ask of a business are: is it good for the persons and their communities who are participating in it? And then, is it participating in some larger? Is it contributing to some larger common good? I would say that itself is a work of demanding practical wisdom, right? Because we start out by saying, well, there's no way I can go into business and make it a flourishing human community. What are you talking about? Well, what can you do in the environment that you find yourself in? Is there nothing you can do? Well, it's a work worthy of the laity to try to figure out how to make, not to take it from nothing to perfection, but to move it closer towards what it might be able to be.
Thank you very much, Professor Yuengert. A very fascinating talk. Greg Robson from the Business Ethics and Society program. We all want to know what justice is. We all want to know what a just society would be like. And one thing I'm hearing from your talk is that it's really difficult to think about that kind of as a scholar at a distance without access to the kinds of practical wisdom that people in particular institutions or particular groups like community groups, the family, and so on, have. So my question is, how important is practical wisdom in enabling us to secure the common good? How much do we need to lean on practical wisdom versus, say, the kinds of things that theorists of justice do when they try to work out theories about the just society?
At two levels. One, I overstated the case when I said the macro level is not a realm of practical wisdom, because we need people at that level exercising practical wisdom. Right? No matter how much they analyze justice, society, no matter what analysis they've done, and even the analysis of the principles of justice that they're doing, at some point you have to let those principles encounter the reality of the order that you're trying to make just, and what's possible as well as what will be effective. And so you need practical wisdom just to govern, right? And there's the principle, the highest level of practical wisdom in Aristotle is that political practical wisdom. So it's not a matter of saying, well, here are the principles. I think a lot of damage gets done by people say, here are the principles, and therefore this has to happen because of the principles, without any judgment about what the reality is that you're applying the principles to. That's true for justice. It's true for courage. True for most of the virtues.
Okay, well, I want to thank you again very much for a wonderful talk and for coming to be with us.
Thank you.